This is the podcast overview for week 7. We will be covering chapter 6, personality and stress. So here's the to-do list for the week. Here are the objectives for the chapter. You can click here to listen to a podcast overview where I go over each one of these concept areas. Here's the lecture slides that go with the chapter. And so this week is really the combination of two central features. One is personality and one is stress. So not just how does personality affect stress, but what are the ins and outs of personality? And understanding that is key to understanding then how the body might be affected by stress, depending upon someone's personality. You may interpret things differently, you may handle things differently, you may gravitate towards certain coping strategies, good or bad. And so personality can really be a central component in mitigating the stress response or coping with stress. Now, some of you have taken personality psych, so that'll be super helpful. But the class isn't meant to operate on the assumption that you've taken personality. So if you haven't, that's okay. Everything will be explained to you. And I've put a couple videos that I think will help you. Now, if you've had personality, these might be things that you can skip over. But if you'd like to review just for the sake of making sure you've got it, that would be great. I put in a video on the Big Five, which we refer to as OCEAN. It's an acronym for the 5 different areas of personality, according to Costa and McCrae. Said that everybody is on one end of the spectrum, kind of like a continuum of these 5 constructs of personality. So stability versus non-stability, agreeable versus disagreeable, open to new experiences versus more closed off to new and changing different environments, extroverted versus introverted, and then conscientious versus more sort of laid back, or not caring as much about order and routine and being on task. So it's important to understand the Big Five because a lot of the research in the area of stress looks at these personality constructs. And so you're going to be going through and trying to figure out how these map onto one's stress response, or how a person deals with stress based on where they fall in the Big Five. Another thing talked about in the research on stress are type A and type B personalities. There's even type D and type T, which are not talked about as much in the context of this class. But what I do want you to focus on is A and B. That's discussed a lot in terms of how it relates to stress. So once you've done the videos and you've done the reading this week, you just have chapter 6 in Harrington. There's no reading in the McGonagall text this week. You'll then be ready to do the discussion. So the discussion questions start with, why do you think studies have found gender differences in anger, hostility, or anxiety as risk factors for chronic heart disease? CHD is chronic heart disease. What kinds of gender differences do we see there, and what explains those differences? So we don't see males and females responding the same when it comes to these constructs. And because of that, these can pose as risk factors for chronic heart disease. As we've seen, these are very linked to heart disease, the anger, hostility, and anxiety, which is typical of a type A personality, right? We see that those people who are high in those traits tend to not fare as well when it comes to heart disease. But it's not the same for men and women, so you're going to explain that. Which personality factors do you believe leave you more vulnerable to stress? So thinking about the big five, what types of traits and characteristics inherent to one's personality would make them more vulnerable to stress, and how do they leave you vulnerable? So explain that out a little bit. And then what healthy strategies can you employ to counteract your personality vulnerabilities? So we're going to be talking about specific strategies there. Number 3 is a more interactive question. You're going to be completing the Insight Exercise 6.1 on page 203. And this is going to help you to determine what is your locus of control. You're going to be learning about locus of control as it plays a role in how we mitigate stress. We've talked a little bit about it, at least in the video that you saw, the stress video. We know how important control is. When one feels they don't have any control, they tend to feel more anxious and have more fear, and they experience the negative effects of stress, and that takes its toll. When one has control, or at least finds a way to gain control even in situations where they may have little, this can be very beneficial. And you're going to be determining what your exact locus of control is, internal versus external. And explaining, are you more internal or external when it comes to locus of control? For you, what did you get? What does that mean about you, and what do you think about that? And why do you think perceptions of control are related to stress and health outcomes? I think you can answer a lot there because you've seen the video. We've been talking about this issue of control and how it relates to stress. And then which theory that includes perceptions of control is your favorite? So there's different theories about how important control is. Which one do you tend to favor? And then lastly, if someone asks you how personality relates to health and longevity, one's longevity, health over the lifespan, what would you say? What do you consider the 3 most important findings in this area, and why? So when we look at someone's health over their lifespan, what do we know is linked to personality? Okay, and so you're explaining the research here in this area. So of course, as always, the expectation is that you are citing the chapter frequently as you support your answers, and that you're citing in APA format. So some of you have been missing the mark there a little bit on that. So make sure you check the Cite as you write document to know how you should be citing. Author's last name and date is standard. So we don't do first names. We don't do titles of the chapter or the book. It's just by the author and date. Okay, so that will help out a little bit with that. And if you have any questions for this week, please let me know.